to present my results of some of the work that I did as a PhD student in writing my dissertation. And my work that I did applied to, I used principles of prevention through design in my dissertation. So. Okay, we're going to start off with, I'm going to give you the definition of prevention through design that is used by NIOSH. Then I'm going to go through an introduction, the goals and specific aims that I had with my dissertation, the background and significance of my research, as well as then the materials and methods that I used, the results, my recommendations, and the limitations, and then where could we go in the future. The concept of prevention through design can be defined as addressing occupational safety and health needs in the design process to prevent or minimize the work-related hazards and risks associated with construction, manufacture, use, maintenance, disposal of facilities, materials, and equipment. Included within this is also training to use the best methods possible. And part of this effort prevention through design is being led by NIOSH. And I think you have seen some of these principles through your first assignment that you did looking at the NIOSH website. You may have had the opportunity to see prevention through design. And the link to the topic I have put in the notes. And so I use prevention through design as part of my dissertation. And the introduction for the reason why we are looking at my topic is that in the U.S. in the past 20 to 30 years, the number of procedures that are used in diagnostic medicine using radionuclides has increased 500 to 600%, and with the increased dose, and also patients, because of the type of radiopharmaceuticals being used, they're receiving higher doses. Well, who do you think is going to be exposed to that? The nuclear pharmacists, and especially the nuclear pharmacist's hands. So this has resulted in there's possible increased exposure for workers. There's also, because they're doing this, there's an increase of musculoskeletal disorders to nuclear pharmacists, because in order to work on this project, in order to work on making up radiopharmaceuticals, they work behind an L block, which protects their chest from the exposure, but you're working like this. This is not lightweight, and this is awkward to use. To try and hold a syringe, and you're going like this with the syringe and having to use your hands. Very awkward posture. You put your hands in awkward postures, and you're looking through the window. So there's issues, and that's been one of the major issues that was presented to me by a nuclear pharmacist here at Purdue. So nuclear pharmacists, they have, at the same time they've got they're trying to protect themselves, L block, to protect themselves from radiation using principles of radiation protection, of minimizing your exposure time. You're maximizing your distance from the pharmaceuticals by using practices, and you've got building, which is the same idea as your protective equipment. At the same time, you're trying to minimize your musculoskeletal injuries. And you also have the effect of repetitive work, because when doing this, you may draw up an hour, 60 doses, 1 a minute for hours doing. I will pass 8 with this with awkward and from as much as possible. And that's a small one. There are ones that are larger than that because of the radiopharmaceuticals being used. If you're using iodine, it's a bigger container than that. So my project, I looked at the interplay between factors for risk of musculoskeletal injury and radiation exposure. And all of these are factors that interact with each other. So I have workstation design, the L block, and also the position of then where you have the equipment. You're looking at, you want to have minimize radiation, the exposure to radiation, and you've got your anthropometry. Because if like Josh did this, he could reach much more easily around the L block than I can, because I'm smaller across my shoulder breadth. And also he has larger hands than I do. So we're looking at all of these interplays between these. And so my goal was to develop a workstation that's adjustable to the anthropometry of the worker so that reduces your exposure and your muscular stresses to the body. And I used in my process, I used video exposure monitoring and a real-time dosimeter. So I was not only able to look at a total dose, I was also able to look at what activities as a person worked might have highest exposure. And so it allowed me to look at factors to decrease, how I can decrease exposure, improve the work postures, and then these together may enhance the strategies for best work practices in the nuclear pharmacy. And so my aims were, I wanted to identify specific work practice in the labs that caused increased exposure. Then I did a modeling where I defined a relationship between the anthropometry of people and the radiation exposure, as well as then I identified the tasks that cause highest musculoskeletal stress to the body. But, you know, at the same time that I was being aware of the musculoskeletal, I was also aware of the radiation exposure, and we have limits on this. And the limits to the whole body are 50 millisieverts per year, 500 to the extremities, and that's what we were really looking at is the hands, because nuclear pharmacists, the greatest exposure is to the hands because they are wearing just regular gloves, the lab gloves, so you do not have a lot of protection. But in order to have the dexterity to handle the syringes and the other equipment, you cannot have, it's very difficult to have a very thick glove and have that dexterity. And then the radiation exposure to the lens of the eye of less than 150 millisieverts per year, and that is a factor with the size of the L block for some very tall people. And then the other principle is as low as reasonably achievable. You want to have it as low as you can have it. And so our traditional, most of the time when you're monitoring, you want to be able to monitor the radiation exposure. And so the traditional methods have been film badges and thermoluminescent dosimeters. There's some nice advantages with those. You can look at the alpha, beta, gamma, neutron radiation. However, these only provide a total dose. They're not real time. You cannot tell the pattern of exposure. And usually also these are worn down at the base of the finger. Well, if you are looking at the fingertip's going to get quite a bit more. Like up to 7 to 10 times it's been found in the research. So you're not getting an actual, wearing it down at the base of the finger, you're not getting the true, may not be getting the true exposure. But there are some newer methods that have been developed of real-time dosimeters. And one of those that has been developed is a form that you can wear on the fingertips. And it measures the real time, so you're able to look and track. And with video camera, you can look at what a person's doing and see, oh, this caused a peak exposure. And see then look at what they're doing and see if there's a way you could reduce that exposure. Because there may be a way in the technique that they're using that you can decrease the exposure. And so as I was looking at my background, I realized, and when I was trying to look at the ergonomics, and also besides the radiation exposure, I looked at the ergonomics of the situation, and I realized clinical lab workers are actually performing some of the same types of tasks. And so they have the same risk to the back, to your upper extremities, and some of this may be based on the design of the workstation and the anthropometry of variations in everyone. And I actually looked up and found from the Bureau of Labor, the statistics are that you have an incidence rate of 2.4 work injuries to workers. And most of the injuries are back pain and carpal tunnel. Because of trying to go like this, you're going to develop you may develop carpal tunnels. You may also have back injuries, wrist, eye, foot, and shoulders. And one of the events or exposures that cause the most are the repetitive motions and your contact with objects. An example of some of this is shown, of the anthropometry variations, is shown in this picture where the one shows myself and the other one shows Dr. McLaughlin. And if you notice, the position of our eyes puts us at a different level as far as being able to work carefully. And also the difference on how much we have to abduct our arms and back and forth, and our elbow height relative to the workstation. And so in addition to, as a result of what we found, we decided, Dr. McLaughlin and I decided that using video exposure monitoring, combining it with our dosimeter, we would be able to correlate the task with the exposure. We could correlate the task with the musculoskeletal stress, and then we could also look at it in relation to the workstation design. And so the significance of what I've done is that video exposure monitoring has this method examined issues not studied before in any of the research that I was looking for. I was able to identify specific elements within a task with higher exposures. I've developed a potential relationship between exposure and anthropometry, and I identified the musculoskeletal stresses caused by specific elements. And I've integrated it to redesign a new workstation design. And so the materials and methods that I used is I did workstation measurements. Some of these things are what you will be doing in your projects. I did anthropometry, measurements of the subjects. I looked at the radiation exposure in phase 1. I did 2 phases. Phase 1, I did the radiation exposure. Phase 2, phase 1, I did also the assessment of an ergonomics, just a pilot study. And then phase 2, I did a much more in-depth analysis of the ergonomics. And then I did analyzed the data. And so basically what you see here is our workstation. I had the L block, and I measured all the different parts within the workstation, where it sat, the width of it, the height of it, the angle that the window was at, the height of the window, and then I measured inside where the equipment was relative to the front of the L block, measured the size of all the equipment, and then I put it together into a chart. And as I did my chart, I do have a description of how I measured everything in my appendices, so that I was consistent. And then, in addition, after doing the workstation measurements, I did anthropometry measurements. I did this overall stature, the eye height. And I decided the eye height was more important than the actual stature, because to look through the window, you need to know the height of the eyes relative to the window. And then the elbow height, I'm sure I think in the last lecture you talked about the elbow height relative to the height that you're working at. And that was key. And then the waist height, because that may, how much you're going to bend as you're doing it. Because nuclear pharmacists, they not only are at that L block, they also sometimes work at a computer station, or they work at a microscope to do some of in some of the making up the radiopharmaceuticals, they have to check the particle size. And then I looked at the shoulder breadth. As I said, we wanted to know how the shoulder breadth related to the width of the L block, because someone that's wider is going to have a much easier time than someone that has a narrow shoulder breadth. And then the other key things were hand size. As you can see, hand size, I'm sure as you pass this around, you saw some people probably had an easier time holding on to this than others. And the same thing with the syringe shield. But you want to use the syringe shield to minimize the exposure. There are some places still in the world that don't regularly use syringe shields. And then the one other measurement was your reach out from here, because you want to be able to make sure you can reach all the equipment easily in the lab. And so I ended up realizing just doing the absolute values of eye height and elbow height and shoulder breadth really wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to look at a relative shoulder breadth, relative eye height, relative elbow height. So I ended up taking the elbow height, actually the eye height, and then I subtracted the height at the center of the L block to try and get a range of optimal eye height with what we have, with what's there right now. And then I did the same thing looking at the elbow height, look at the height that the L block was set at on the counter, and the shoulder breadth so that someone that's wider or narrower, you try and optimize your coverage. You want to be fully covered in front of you, but you also want to be able to work around it easily. So this diagram just basically shows the layout of how our data flowed. We had people working at the L block, and then at the same time we had two cameras that were focused on the worker. One was set up inside and focused down on the hands, so you could see what the hands were doing. And then the other camera was focused off to the side, so you could see what the back and neck, angle of the neck, what positions they were in, because I was going to use that in my analysis of the ergonomics. And then the video goes to the computer, but then also at the same time we're capturing the video, we're also doing the capturing of the radiation exposure using this. And so at the same time, so we're able to correlate activity with the actual radiation that the fingertips are receiving. And then it went to the computer, and we were able then later to watch simultaneously the output of the radiation exposure with the video. And so this was our lab setup. I had so you can see in the corner of the lab was the one camera that focuses down and looks at what the hands are doing. It also helps you do the ergonomic evaluation of the hands. So my actual work is set up as I had two cameras. and the dosimeter, one of the probes was on each hand, and we ended up taping it to the middle finger because looking at the research, it was usually either the index finger or your middle finger receives the highest dose. And we decided for consistency and talking to Dr. Weatherman that putting it on the middle finger was the best place to put it. And also, your middle finger tends to be a little bit longer, so for the smaller people, it was a little bit easier to put it there. And so after I did that, after doing my recordings, I reviewed the video of an exercise where people did a simulated dose drawing of a dose, and they used optimal work practices and non-optimal work practices, and I will show you what I mean by that in just a little bit. This was my protocol. They used optimal work practices in Part A, and Part B was non-optimal, and it was the same thing, except with the non-optimal, they did not use syringe shield or tongs to maneuver. When you're using the tongs, you use the tongs to take it out of here and take it to the dosimeter, the dose calibrator. And that helps maximize your distance from your radiation in your syringe. And so then my ergonomic methods was I had 2 stages. In stage 1, I used anthropometry. In phase 2, I added into anthropometry, I added hand grip strength in. And I used a pinch grip gauge and a hand diameter to measure grip strength, because we decided after we did the first stage that a factor may be in the ease of doing this procedure, maybe hand grip strength of people. So that was something that was added in phase 2. And then also part of my ergonomics was I used a tool called RULA, which is Rapid Upper Limb Assessment. And I will talk further about that in just a little bit. It's a very easy method that it has been used before in this class for projects as a way of assessing ergonomics. Okay, this is the equipment I use for my hand grip strength and pinch grip strength, and there are some methods that you would use if you wanted to use this in your project that we could help you learn. Okay, then included then is further monitoring. I looked at the videos and I took notes of the particular processes that seem to create the most stress to the body. And then I used RULA, like I said. It's a commonly used tool for assessing the stress to the upper limbs. It's very quick and easy, and it's pretty easy to learn. And it's often been used then as a good tool that you can use before, and then you can use it after an assessment, after you've made changes in a procedure, to see if it lowers your injury risk. And as I said, RULA has been in the literature, and it's available at the Cornell University Ergo site. And there's other tools available there that you might be interested in looking at for your projects. And it's been used previously in a variety of studies. It's been used in healthcare workers, manufacturing, automotive plants. It's also been used in laboratories and sewing machine facilities. But it's a semi-quantitative. You're able to break a task, and I would advise you to do this. If you have a big task that there's different aspects to it, you can break it down into small task elements. And so you can determine which part of the overall task is the most stressful. And the score definitely has been shown to reflect the risk of upper limb disorders. And the overall score involves your arm and wrist posture, neck, trunk, and leg postures, your muscle use, how repetitive it is, and the force and load of what you're holding. And if you're doing using a tool like Rula or Reba, Reba is another easy tool. It's based off of Rula. It's helpful to have video and pictures, a protractor afterwards you can use to measure angles, a scale so you can know the weight of what's being handled, and a watch so you can determine how often an action's occurring, or if your posture is static. And the Rula scores, as they increase, the risk increases. And so here's the Rula sheet that I similar to what I used. And actually, in the upper part on the left-hand side, you do an arm and wrist analysis. And you included in this is, at the end, is a frequency and muscle score. And then you also do a neck, trunk, and leg analysis. And then when you finish with that, you come to table C and you get a final score. And so the arm wrist analysis is based on, you locate your upper arm position, how far out from the body. If you're going like this, it's going to be higher than if you're able to have it here. And this all fits with your 90-degree rule that Dr. McLaughlin, I think, is talking to you about. And then you want to locate your lower arm position, your wrist position. You have a score for your wrist, and you have how much you twist your wrist. And you can see when I was doing this, you have quite an extreme wrist twist on that. And then when you come up with your score, you will use table A. If you had a score of, on your upper arm was 2, and your lower arm was 3, you would come over here. And then if your wrist posture was 2, you would come over here. And then if your wrist twist, though, was a 1 or a 2, it happens to come out of 4. And that would be your score you would put down in step 5. And then after you've done then step 5, you would have a 5, a posture score of 5. And then you have to look at your muscle use. If your posture's static, so you're held more than a minute, or if your action occurs 4 times per minute or more, you add 1 point. And then if you add, then also if your load is in these ranges, it depends on what you add. Then a force load score, and then you come up with the final score that you will use when you use table C. And now you go through on your neck. You do a neck, trunk, and leg analysis based on the position of the neck and your trunk, and then if your legs are supported or not. And I found that quite often when I was doing my research, the people that were shorter, they would have to stand on a stool, and the stool quite often was just wide enough for them to stand on. I did not, because of the risk of them falling off of it, would not consider that to be well supported, because they could fall off of the stool that they were working. And so you will use those, and you'll do you will come out with a similar score the way you did with your upper arm, with your arms. Then you come up, you again have a muscle use score, a force load score, and a final score for the neck, trunk, and legs. And then your final rule of score is determined based on your neck, trunk score and your wrist and arm score. And you come up with the final score. And so you can see the steps are, you have to do an arm and wrist analysis, a neck, trunk, and leg analysis, and then you come up with your rule of score. And then based on your rule of score, you will have a recommended action. And then I know based on RULA, there was then later further research has been done on how we could use the RULA and apply it to the whole body. And if you look at the Cornell website and you see REBA, you will see when you look at the REBA score sheet, it starts off with the same material as RULA. You just extend it then to the whole body, and there's more extensive work that's done with the legs and trunk. And if you have any questions and want some help on learning to use it, I would be glad to help you learn. So my data analysis, I looked at the video, I correlated the task elements with the exposure, I used standard descriptive statistics to describe the characteristics of anthropometry, hand grip strength, pinch grip, radiation exposure, and the RULA scores. Then I compared the anthropometry data from my samples to the U.S. population. I compared the strength scores to populations in the literature, and I developed then relationships between exposure and anthropometry, and also between RULA scores and anthropometry. Do you want to do a quiz now? I'm going to say before we get into the results.
No, he edits out the video or the quiz.
Okay, now that we've gone through the methods, I'll give you some of the results of what I did. The results of my anthropometry for my radiation assessment was that I had my demographics as I had 6 males, 3 females. I had 8 of them were right-handed, 1 of them left-handed. However, that left-handed person performed the procedure the same as the right-handed person. So when I did my evaluation, I considered them to be the same as the right-handed person. As far as looking, because I at first thought we'd look at dominant versus non-dominant hand. But since they did the procedure the same as a right-handed person, I think they were, and this is quite often the case, they were ambidextrous. And what I found was that the variables, though, of these people, they varied significantly from the U.S. mixed population in most of the measurements that I made. However, the interesting thing was when I compared them to the next group, the ergonomic assessment group, that group, they were, with the ergonomic group, they were basically consistent with them, but the ergonomic group pretty much had anthropometry that was the same as the U.S. mixed population. So I ended up, because of this, in my consideration of design and workstation layout, I ended up deciding that it was reasonable to use the U.S. mixed population for my overall final design. Because part of the issue with my radiation assessment was such a small group, only 9 people, and with 6 men, 3 female, it was a little challenging to decide how how to relate it, because I think if we'd since anthropometry is normally distributed, and when I looked at the results that I had, they were normally distributed. Probably with a larger population, I would have come back to very similar to U.S. population. Since my ergonomic assessment, I found that to be the case. And so I looked at then considering that, then I looked at my fit of my sample populations to the L block dimensions. And I found definitely that my eye height of my populations did not fit. Did not fit well the eye height that the L block was at. And the same thing with the width of the block. It did not fit well with the populations. In fact, it was such that it definitely would suggest that the L block, the width of the L block, would very much be helpful to be able to have it narrower for the population, especially when we're looking at the growth of women in nuclear pharmacy. Because there's more and more women. If you go over and look at the School of Pharmacy pictures, it's switched in the last 30 years from mostly male to almost all female. So these considerations I looked at, and then in addition, here's my optimal versus non-optimal. On the left-hand side, you see a person using optimal work practice of using a syringe and using a tongs to manipulate the radiopharmaceutical that's in a syringe. On the right-hand side, the pictures show non-optimal work practices. And this is key because in some places there are certain situations that when they're doing certain parts of the procedure, they do not use optimal work practices. And it's still out, and I had very recent papers showing that. And so this is basically, this picture just shows like a typical output that I got when I was doing the exposure monitoring of one of the people as they were working. And when you look at the first about 70 seconds, that was when the person was using non-optimal work practices. And the last part of the time, they were using optimal work practice. And you can see a definite difference in the dose that they receive as they are doing each activity. And sometimes there is, I know, some variation. You see very similar, but it has to do with the right versus left hand and the activity the right and left hand are doing. And so then this is the cumulative dose, because our dosimeter here not only does the real-time dose by second, but we are also able to capture the cumulative dose. And so we notice a definite decrease when they're using best work practices for the radiation protection. We also found some interesting facts that it's faster to do it using non-optimal work practices. And that's what this graph basically shows us, that for each person we saw that the time was longer using optimal work practices. The exposure time, the time that actually when you look down at, when I look at the data from here, and they had times that they were, specific times that they were exposed, the time that they were exposed was much less when they use optimal work practices, which is part A. And then their actual total exposure also was much less using optimal work practices. So basically what we're saying is, sure, it may be faster to use on non-optimal work practice, but the difference on the amount of exposure is so much less when you use optimal. You're much better off using your best work practices. And this basically shows the numerical results of my summary. And I not only looked, when I did my analysis, I looked at the total procedure, how much exposure they received. And then I divided it up into different task elements. Based on task element 1 was just their, task element 2 was drawing up their dose. Task element 1 was when they were first putting it into a syringe shield. Task element 3 was going from here to here, taking it to the dose calibrator. And task 4 was putting into the waste container. But looking at where did they get the most exposure. And so then I broke down the task. And I looked at the actual time that it took to perform each part of the task. And you can see that when they use optimal for each one of these little tasks, it took more time. However, and I looked at the exposure to both right and left hand on the exposure time, and it took, when you compare the optimal work practices, the exposure time versus the non-optimal, there's a significant difference. Because you can see, if you go back and forth, it's very much less using optimal work practices the time that they are actually have exposure to the hands. The most significant exposure was when they were drawing it up, and it tended to be that the one hand would receive more because they were, and it was very similar on both optimal or non-optimal, because the left hand tended to be the one taking off and the cap off of the syringe. And so it would be similar for both optimal and non-optimal, because that doesn't change much the activity that they're doing. But usually the right hand was doing the manipulating of the syringe in the syringe shield. And so when you have the right hand holding this versus just the syringe, the barrel of the syringe, that reduces your exposure a tremendous amount. In fact, like when I compared the exposure time for optimal, it's about 50% of the non-optimal work practices for the whole procedure. That's a lot. And then the time to do it, the left hand generally received higher exposure than the right hand when using optimal because of the needle, uncapping and uncapping the needle. But the right hand was exposed for a greater time than the left when using non-optimal, because when you're holding the barrel of the syringe, that's where most of your radioactive material is in that barrel of that syringe when you're trying to make up a radiopharmaceutical. Because when I talk about making up a radiopharmaceutical, they put a radioactive material in there, and then they add saline, and they may have to do some more work also. They may add saline a couple different times, as well as they may have to add other materials too. So then my comparison of when I looked at the actual radiation exposure on my dose and when you're looking at actual radiation exposure, you're going to look at the hand that gets the most exposure. That's the one that's going to be recorded for documentation by like RAM or by your radiation safety officer. They're going to record the hand that's getting the highest exposure. So you can see there's a factor in some cases of about 7 for the total procedure between when you use optimal versus non-optimal. And that's been found, that's just very typical, that's been found in the literature, is finding that kind of difference. And then I had factors of differences by factors of 5.75, 16.9 and 5 for the task 1, 2, and 3, and 4, the factors of exposure. And I think you can see that the left hand using optimal generally receives the higher dose, and then the right hand receives the higher dose when you're using non-optimal. So when I put this together, I said, sure, maybe faster, but what cost when you use non-optimal? It's enough that these results actually showed that it might be possible, especially looking at the fingertip, that a worker could get above the annual limit. The potential is there, especially in some places. And so then, after doing my analysis this way, I also then did further analysis looking at, I asked the question based on some very early observations looking at anthropometry of different people. I had done a pilot study with just 2 people, and there was a difference of several inches, and said, could anthropometry play a role? And I thought, okay, so we'll investigate that. And so I came up with some relationships. This was looking at the total radiation exposure in anthropometry, and there appears to be a relationship. And I focused especially, because of my large number of variables but small number of population, I focused on the hand size. And then I also looked at by task element, did the similar analysis. And then I did a predicted relationships, what my equations would predict based on the hand size. And then after doing this, I also then did an ergonomic assessment, and I did the general ergonomic, and I did RULA, and I did a development of some regression equations. And in phase 2, I looked at the hand grip strength and the RULA scores, and I divided it up based on 4 task elements. And then this was my general results. I pointed out using the video, I found these particular stresses, some general results, and then what I would recommend if it was possible to do in the lab to help alleviate these problems. And then my RULA scores with my radiation assessment, I found all of the tasks needed further investigation, with some of them needing change pretty quickly if it was possible. And then I also, like I said, I defined some relationships between RULA and anthropometry. And then in phase 2, after doing my measurements of anthropometry, I did an evaluation of hand grip strength. And basically my hand grip strength results fell within the normal of my population, fell within what the US normals are. Even though it looks like there's real extremes, and you would expect the hand strength, I know from your class that you expect the hand strength as the people get older to decrease. Actually, some of the research, it's not until you get to 60 that some of the decreases occur. But this was an unusual mix a little bit, because Dr. McLaughlin was one of the ones was one of the stronger ones. But the female population fell within the normal female population means. And the same thing with the pinch grip strength. And on the pinch grip, I did 2 pinch grip strengths. I did this one, which is one you see more data on, and then there's this, because I was trying to look at the fact that when you're doing some of the procedures, you may do more of this than always this. So I was using those measurements to help me analyze the results of how much exposure was gotten, how it might affect the RULA scores, and how those factors could be affected on how long it might take you to do it. And so then I came out again with ruler scores that I had. I tracked how long it took people, and on the second part, I had them do it repetitively, so I had that repetition, which gives you a different effect than if they do it just a couple times. And so then my assessment showed that for all of these tasks that I needed further investigation, at least, if not to change it right away, change it soon. And one of the ways you can change it, and I again defined my relationships between rule and anthropometry. So one of the ways you can possibly change it is by using concepts from prevention through design. And the way I did it was by using redesign my L block. The current shield was 40 centimeters by 40 in height. So from here up to about the way the window was, and then the window slanted, and then you had another distance up. And so I used these concepts, and I made it so, and then the width actually is almost the same width as the average shoulder width, which actually, and I measured it from here to here, and I should have measured from here to here. And that was one of my limitations, and that's one of the things I would fix in the future, is I would do a different shoulder measurement. But ideally what it would be nice is to be able to have it adjustable, so you could adjust the height so that it would go for a shorter person down here, so you could look very easily through the middle of the window. Because if you notice in that one picture, I'm barely able to look at the window, and in reality, part of the time in order to do the procedure, I was like this. And I actually, in my second part of my study, I had a person that was even shorter than me doing it. And she had a very difficult time doing it. But then you had people like Dr. McLaughlin, who their eyes are up above the window, which puts your eyes over the window, which exposes your eyes to radiation. And that's not good either. So you want to be able to have that window up so the people can look through the window safely and not be exposed to radiation. So I would like to be, it would be nice if it's sitting on the size of this, on this counter, to have it be able to be adjusted from 35, from the base of that, up to 65.45, and then have the width be adjustable inward and outward. And in order to do these calculations, I had to use the anthropometry that you've been using in here. And so this was a proposed redesign. What it would look like is to be able to have panels that slide in and out, so you could adjust it to fit you. And this shows it set at the smallest size and then at the largest size. And then some other recommendations is to use optimal work practices, train in optimal work practices, and these all fit into your prevention through design, because part of prevention through design includes the training. You want to be able to monitor occasionally their techniques, that they're using appropriate techniques. Using a tool such as this, you would be able to help them maintain techniques correctly. And actually, this is a good tool for training, because you can help them, because they would be able to watch a video and see if they're doing it correctly to minimize their exposure. You want to then design it so that the nuclear pharmacists have the flexibility possibly to sit or stand. You want to train nuclear pharmacists to set up the workstation to fit him or herself. And then my final suggestion was to modify this in a way that it would make it easier to handle, but still keep a hand protected, and also be able to decrease your postures, your awkward postures. So optimally, my conclusions were that the use of principles of prevention through design will reduce exposure and musculoskeletal disorders, and also that simultaneously assessing exposure to multiple hazardous agents, such as radiation, ergonomics, can be performed using video exposure monitoring. I can look at and using video exposure monitoring allows you to look at the interactions between multiple hazardous agents. Is there synergy? Does one make it increase the other? And then my radiation assessment conclusions of optimal practices reduced exposure by a factor of 7. There were certain tasks that created more exposure. The hand positions I felt like influenced exposure. And anthropometry variability may influence exposure, especially your hand size. And the ergonomic assessment, the design of the L block, may be the primary risk factor. And so I recommended a L block be redesigned, and I redesigned it so it's adjustable in height and width. The challenge may be that the engineering of it may be a challenge. My other conclusions, you can use BAM systems in the training of workers in optimal work practice. And this wouldn't just apply in radiation, in nuclear pharmacy. It could apply in other workplaces using video exposure monitoring. And so I had definite limitations. There were some limitations on my dosimeter. There's sample size, my anthropometry that I chose, the number of cameras available. And then if doing further study, I'd want more subjects. I'd want to use some other tools such as the strain index and the threshold limit value for hand level activity, so I could look much more at what the stress was to the hand. And then I would build the prototype and evaluate this prototype's effectiveness. Any questions? You'll find actually some of the references are here also on the PowerPoint. So if you want to use them for your project, you can.